We've got a quorum here. We've got a couple board members stuck in traffic who are on their way, so hopefully should be here shortly. I think otherwise, if we are ready to go, I'm going to go ahead and start. So this special board meeting of the Board of Education for March 7th, 2023 is called to order. Welcome, Ms. Bardley. The purpose of tonight's meeting is to consider complaint number 2022-06, in which you're appealing the district's decision. In accordance with Board Policy 4.50.032P, the district follows certain procedures for resolution of formal complaints by students, parents, guardians, and people who reside in the district in order to resolve formal complaints in a fair and timely manner. For your complaint, you'll have 5 minutes to provide comments. Following your comments, board members may follow up with questions for you or for staff. And with that, any questions about the process?
I just want to make one comment before starting, and that's just to say that I'm grateful for the community who's here, especially my own mother who is here from Buffalo, New York, which just witnessed and experienced a traumatic hate crime where 10 Black people were killed in a supermarket right in the neighborhood where my mother has a flower shop for many years. And so that's why we wanted to bring the flowers to remember the impact of white supremacy on the community that, she still lives in. And I'm really grateful for all the community to be together, to walk forward together against hate. So no questions, but I just wanted to say thanks, Pommy Mom.
Thank you. Thanks everyone for being here tonight. With that, then I would invite you to begin, and we'll start the 5 minutes.
Okay. A couple of things. I think first, when I read the last page of this document that says whether you're affirming that it's right under board decision that Portland Public Schools does meet the requirements of the law stated by, quote, providing lessons that provide education about the Holocaust, genocide, and anti-racist education. I just want to clarify, it's not just about providing lessons. It is, in fact, about whether or not PPS is currently following the law. And that most updated statement came from Ms. Powell to me this afternoon. It's not regarding whether or not lessons are provided, but whether the law itself is being followed. And my complaint was not related specifically to lessons, but whether the law currently is being followed. And I really want to make sure there's time for Teresa Botman to share a few words. I'm going to turn it over and hopefully we can just come right back after that. And if there's time, we have 2 students who have a paragraph to share. There is pertinent information here that you would need to make this decision. One thing I want to draw your attention to before turning it over to Ms. Botman is that here in the statement from the board, it says clearly, right here on the second to last page, that PPS adopted ELA curriculum for 6 through 12 that contains lessons that are specific to the Holocaust and features the diary of Anne Frank and speeches and articles about Elie Wiesel. I want to point out this is a document that shows exactly what 8th grade teachers are supposed to teach. Everyone has a copy, and we've been directed to teach this to the extent that our previous curriculum, we were asked to actually box it up and leave our previous curriculum toward the door, which was actually something that felt very authoritarian and offensive to a lot of us. But we have been directed to teach these. This here is our book. This is Unit 6. Unit 6 is not among those that we are being directed to teach. There are 4 quarters in the year. There are 4 units on this document. And PPS has currently excluded the unit that's available on the Holocaust. So I want to make sure that that's perfectly clear. Maybe go ahead, Teresa, and I think there's more to be said, but.
Okay, well, I'm here also to testify that that I'm convinced that the district is not following Senate Bill 664. I'm a granddaughter of Holocaust survivors. I'm a PPS teacher and parent. I'm also trained by Western States Center on providing training on the toolkit Confronting White Supremacy in Schools toolkit. So I have multiple viewpoints, and definitely keep my eye on PPS so-called commitment to, and this is a quote from a recent article, teaching, modeling, and living by anti-racist values. And I'm in a lot of, I support students learning English in social studies classrooms on the high school level and in language arts classrooms. I'm very familiar with the new adopted curriculum for high school. I've reviewed it carefully through an anti-racist lens. I've also read a study on Wit and Wisdom, which is another recently adopted curriculum, through an anti-racist lens, and I'm actually finding a lot of problematic content that actually is very that features racist depictions of people of color. It's revisionist, it's paternalistic, and it has white supremacist narratives and contributes to erasure of difficult issues. So we're actually not only not following the law, we're going against the law in terms of propagating these kinds of messages. And we really need to shift our culture as a district. I'm hearing a lot about resources, people, time, and money. It's not necessarily, I might be hearing a rebuttal that this is an unfunded mandate, but that's not the issue. The issue is that we need to actually manage resources differently. Instead of monopolizing teachers' time with this kind of corporate curriculum and paying for these super expensive corporate consultants that come in to sell said curriculum, we need to actually give teachers time to peruse the available resources, to collaborate on lessons, to hone their skills. It needs to be teacher-directed in the spirit of this law, instead of focusing on the curriculum that's highly inadequate in this way.
And I will take it back just to clarify the way that PPS is not specifically following the law, which is what we're looking at. There is no systemic manner in which PPS is teaching about the importance of the protection of international human rights for all people. No systemic manner in which teaching is accessible to all students. There's no systemic opportunity for students to contextualize and analyze patterns of human behavior by individuals and groups who belong in one or more category, including perpetrator, collaborator, bystander, victim, and rescuer. And 4, all of these things are specified in the language of the law. There's no systemic opportunity for students to understand the ramifications of prejudice, racism, and stereotyping. When PPS wrote back to me, they specifically said that anti-racist is not the language used to describe what is required in the law. So I'm using the language of the law to say there is no systemic opportunity for students to understand the ramifications of prejudice, racism, and stereotyping. It does not exist at this time.
So Ms. Berlin, I want to make sure we have some time for the students. It sounded
Thank
like they
you.
had a
I
couple of
appreciate that. I hope you
paragraphs
be
to
allowed
read, I
clear
think.
and I hope you read the document before voting.
When kids are educated about the Holocaust in school, which they aren't, they will get the real raw information. Normally when kids look for information, they get it off the internet and from celebrities and famous people. And I was talking to my older brother who's in high school about my essay. The only thing he knew was that I had to do with Jews and Nazis. Your children are more likely to be influenced by people with big social platforms so they can get their information off the internet. They aren't getting real details. Yes, it was a mass genocide, and yes, millions of lives were lost. Children of the future, and we just can't let them repeat history.
If we forget about the Holocaust, we're not just forgetting about Nazis and Hitler, we're also forgetting about all the people who suffered, as well as their stories. I heard from a legacy speaker, Moses Ware. He's a child, cousin, and grandchild to people who experienced the Holocaust firsthand. This is relevant because you can't deny this history. Moses has seen scars and the numbers on people's wrists of the Holocaust survivors. There's literal records and pictures that Nazis have kept track of to keep record of all the Jewish people that they tortured and killed on foot.
Thank you. Thanks for being here and sharing. At this point, we can open up for board conversation, but actually maybe I'll turn it over to superintendent and staff. Would you like to provide a little bit of context and information?
Yeah, no, I appreciate attention to the topic. In some ways, I appreciate that we're wanting to make sure we adequately address these topics at a time when we have school systems and states around the country that are moving away from them. But I think to best speak to the specifics, our chief academic officer is here this evening. I think she can summarize sort of the highlights of a response to the complainant.
Great, thank you. Kimberly Armstrong, Chief Academic Officer, and I have with me Dr. James Crawford, Interim Senior Director of High School Core Academics. And so I appreciate you being here and your thoughtfulness, and definitely, warm thoughts with you for the impacted community and what you suffered. So just in response to the complaint that we're violating state law by failing to provide Holocaust, genocide, and anti-racist education, I outlined 4 instances where we are in fact meeting state law. And so as outlined in the board memo, I'm not sure if I'm supposed to walk through each claim at this point, or.
I think providing a high level,
Sure,
the
sure.
district's response would be helpful.
Yeah, absolutely. While the law doesn't necessarily use the phrase anti-racist, we do have resources and lessons regarding the Holocaust and genocides, and we recognize the importance of race, prejudice, and stereotyping. Where Claim 2 mentions that just the resources provided by ODE, but are not provided by the district as required by law. So we actually do in fact have resources that we provide to all schools, and it shows that we're in alignment with state materials, and also we provide links and resources to those materials. And then Claim 3 that suggests that in order to meet the law, there are additional resources, Native American history being one of those things. And so we do make connections to Senate Bill 13 with the resources and lessons that we have around genocide and anti-racist education. And we use tribal history and shared history as a vehicle to teach those critical concepts. And then finally, Claim 4, just the response about sparse materials and reading available in some classes in Portland, but are not district provided materials. We have direct links to resources and lessons across PPS. We have some of those materials listed on our websites, and they're provided to teachers. And just a couple of examples for K-5 social studies, and this addresses the social studies standard that are outlined in some connecting documents that explicitly address the Holocaust. We have that provided out. And then also we adopted an ELA curriculum 6 through 12, and those lessons are specific to the Holocaust. And in fact, as pointed out in grade 8, unit 6, we do have the features of Diary of Anne Frank and the speeches and articles. So we do in fact have the expectation that those are taught.
Thank you.
I just have a question because we heard that we've got this handout of what teachers are asked to teach, and it doesn't have unit 6. So I'm wondering about where that discrepancy is.
Yeah, and I would have to get some more information on this. But I can also say that some of the topics that were outlined are taught meeting state standard through social studies. And ELA is an additional resource that we use to teach those core concepts. But where we meet state law is through social studies.
And that's the new curriculum we're going to be adopting, correct?
No, that's current, what's now, and we're also going through a process of curriculum adoption.
Let us know when we might have a chance to respond.
Yeah, I think that's, yeah.
We're
go ahead.
both social studies certified in addition to English Language Arts and ELD. And it is absolutely true and accurate that there is indeed no social studies curriculum, nor is there any curriculum related to Holocaust or genocide education provided for social studies teacher currently. Even in the response here, it does in fact, as Ms. Lowry stated, mention what's to come, and that is something that the district's building on. It is absolutely untrue that currently exists. There are quite a few other issues with the district's response, including what seemed like almost a copy paste of SB, the Native American Survivance Law. That is, it's not that it's just offensive, but it's almost offensive in multiple ways, because we're talking about the Holocaust and other genocides, and to have laws that were fought for by indigenous people, applied to this as if that is satisfactory for an entirely different law, it is totally erroneous, not acceptable. There also has been no training for teachers. Did you want to speak on that?
Yes, I forgot in my speech to mention that one of the biggest components, it's one thing to provide curriculum to teachers and, our PD, which just disseminates the resources, but it's another, teachers really need time to collaborate, to absorb the curriculum, to get familiar with it, and to practice with each other, to hone their craft. And that's something that we don't have. And it's not we are missing that systemic piece of having sanctioned time to absorb the curriculum, and we are missing the piece of getting anti-racist training for teachers, because how can we discern what may be revisionist history in these textbooks that we have just adopted if we don't have the training to see through that lens? It's absolutely necessary. I've been in this district for 13 years, and I've witnessed the dismantling of our only comprehensive anti-racist training for teachers, Courageous Conversations, and the dismantling of the department that provided that training. And to me, that is unacceptable.
So to be clear, that's another layer in this, because the law states that districts have to provide curriculum to be given to students on racism and prejudice, bystanders, all of those issues. But specifically, if you're looking at the language racism and prejudice, that our district and all Oregon districts have to provide that curriculum. That is not being provided systemically to students. It is not. Yes, you could come to my class in some classes and see that, but I think Kennedy wanted to speak on that or something close to it as well.
Just as a student, I've never experienced being taught about that until 8th grade. And my brother's in high school and he hasn't even learned about that at all. And it's just the fact that, just as she was mentioning how we have 4 quarters and we're not even getting to the 6th unit, it's just, there's no learning about the Holocaust.
And there's
So
quite a
I
sense of
want to
control.
open it up to board
Yeah,
questions.
sure.
So we'll get back to that. Director Edwards.
So I have a question, and it a little bit relates to what we're being asked to affirm, but also just maybe more an interpretation of what the law is. Because I'm looking at the original complaint and the statute. It says school districts must provide instructions about the Holocaust and genocide. Instruction required under this section must be designed. And it seemed, when I was reading the district answer, it talked about lessons being provided, but like more, those are resources to schools and teachers. I don't know who to direct this question to. Versus that actually, the way I read the statute, but
Thank you.
please interpret it. The way I read the statute is that we must provide instruction, not, so the district's responsibility is not providing lessons to schools, but that we must provide instruction to students.
The
Exactly.
actual statute says instruction required under this section must be designed to, and then the criteria. That's the language of the statute.
I'm sorry.
Instruction required under this law must be designed to accomplish these objectives that follow.
So am I missing part of the statute here is why
Maybe
it's
I have it up.
confusing?
I don't know.
Instruction required under this section must be designed to, and then it says,
But,
our students develop students, promote students.
but number 1 says, I'm sure, sorry, school must provide instruction about the Holocaust and genocide.
That's correct.
Yes.
Yes.
Is not just about the curriculum. I mean, isn't that saying that we need to actually teach it, not just provide
That's right.
lessons?
That's
It
right.
says that instruction, so I think instruction is a fairly plain term. The instruction that encompasses content because it's designed to. I think instruction being designed can encompass both content and methodology or training. It has to be designed to implement the goal of the statute.
So it's just confusing to me because it looks like the statute says that we must provide the instruction,
That is what it says.
not just do it. And then I'm looking back on page 2 of the response. It says PPS does provide schools and teachers with resources and lessons. And I believe we have an opportunity to improve our direct follow-up with every school to ensure they are utilizing the resources provided, which seems like maybe, I guess we don't know whether it's provided or not, but we know that, it sounds like we know that lessons are provided to schools, but we don't necessarily know that lessons, this is, sorry, this is a question for staff.
I think it's a direction for Dr. Armstrong.
Yeah.
Yes.
whoever-
Yeah.
Yeah, so what I can say is all of our English language arts teachers received a crosswalk document that shows where they weave in tribal history, shared history, and the professional development that we have designed for that follow-up is through our monthly cadre meetings. And so that's the professional learning in that. So the expectation is that teachers are teaching the lessons, but I think if you're asking for an account of every classroom of what that instruction looks like, we don't have an audit where I can speak to that with every deal of accuracy, but I can tell you that the expectation is that it's happening. We've provided the resources, we've provided the structure for professional learning, and we also have a series of things that we do, instructional rounds, learning walks, and classroom visits that are just performed by various members of my team and myself.
Director Constam and then Vice Chair.
I have a question, but I want to follow up on what you just said also. So there are very many specific directives from state law having to do with curriculum specifically. So my first question is, do those instructional rounds and those other processes you just talked about, do they have a component that is checking to see whether certain mandated elements of instruction are being met?
No, not at this time. That's not the frame with the instructional framework. I think it's more about getting calibrated as a team and then being able to speak fluently about what's happening in classrooms and what we're seeing, what's being used, if the materials are being used, and if the instruction is standards aligned and
Okay, thank you. My original question really does get back to 6 to 8 social studies. So I get that the ELA is the supplemental way that we're addressing things, and that's what you outlined here. But it's not clear to me how Holocaust education is being woven into social studies in 6 to 8 here, because in the response, it only refers to the tribal history. So.
Yeah, that's great. And I'm going to ask Dr. Crawford to share a little bit more on the social studies as he's been working.
Yeah, so for 6-8 October 2021, at our leadership meeting, all the building leaders were introduced or reminded of the tribal history, the shared history. There's a resource document that was provided and shared with all 6-8 school leaders and ELA and social studies teachers in October of 2022. And there was a link to the 6th grade, 7th grade, and 8th grade scope and sequences that outline all of the alignment to each one of the areas, whether it's tribal or shared history, Holocaust, genocide, or ethnic studies. That initial rollout was in 21-22. We've been collaborating with the Oregon Jewish Museum and Holocaust Education Center, and they've been presenting to 9-12 social studies cadres in January 2022. They did an embedded professional development day on February 17th. When it comes to 6-12, not just that aspect of it, but the HMH into literature does contain lessons that are specific to Holocaust at grade 8 in Unit 6 that teachers can use as a supplemental to the work that's being done in addition to social sciences.
What does shared history mean in this context?
That's related to the tribal shared history bill that was passed in addition to that. So there are 3 areas of this work: tribal shared history, Holocaust, genocide, and then also the ethnic studies work that we do.
Director Hollins, Vice Chair Hollins.
Yeah, my question is going to follow up with the other directors. Is that how I know we have this or have these learning objectives, but how do we know they're actually getting it? And I again think that's, for me, that's what it comes down to. How do we know that they are actually getting it? Just because we put it out there, but if we're not, following up with how if they're actually receiving it, that's kind of what comes up for me. Because we can say, yeah, we put it out there, but according to the law, it's supposed to be getting taught. So unless we're doing something to know it's getting taught, I don't know how we can rebuff the claim we're providing it if we don't know if it's been taught.
I appreciate that question, and one of the ways that we look to ensure that is through our professional learning series, and whether that's cadres or even in that PLC group meetup time where they're having discussions about the material and instructional strategies and how it went. And so not just necessarily saying, well, here's this lesson, or here are links to a document and good luck. It's about, we're providing these materials, and then we're going to make sure that we schedule regular learning sessions that also includes feedback, so that we can hear from the field how it's going, but then also to provide the necessary information we need, or our teachers need, to move learning forward.
And if I could add on that, the additional supports are also with our building principals. And as we were working with our building principals, we're building their capacity around this area, so they're leading their buildings and having conversations directly with their teachers as the primary evaluator of those teachers. They are holding them accountable to ensuring that those lessons are taught in their classrooms.
And we have that documentation that they're getting that done. Is that in their evaluation? So can I go look at the evaluation and it'll show in there that yes, they are getting this lesson done? Or are we, that's what I'm asking. Is it documented somewhere?
Yeah, I just would have to say, without some system-wide audit of all of the documents or the evaluations across the system, I just don't know if I can accurately answer that.
May I
Thank you.
comment?
We'll come back to you in a second, Ms.
Thank
Bartley. Yeah, Director. Valerie.
I think, so a comment, maybe questions, we'll see where we go with this. So I sometimes feel like when we're in spaces like this that we have someone who's on the ground saying, this is my lived experience, and like this document about the 4 units, and we're saying, well, we've provided you the curriculum, and I know we're a big complex system, but it often feels like there are disconnects. Like, okay, PPS is providing the instruction, we think it's being taught, and then somewhere along the system, teachers are getting a different message. And so I think that can sometimes be a source of our conflicts, that sometimes the left hand doesn't know what the right hand is doing. And how do we say, we think we have the groundwork in place, but I think exactly what Director Hollins is saying, how do we know what's actually happening in the classrooms? And here we're hearing from 2 of our educators that it doesn't feel like some of what we think should be happening in the classrooms maybe is. And so how do we investigate that? And I heard the complainant talk about this conflation with the Native American history. And so as I read the law, I see a lot of what's in the law that does touch into our Native American history about genocide. And I think some of the language in the complaint about anti-racism lends itself to some of that overlap. There is overlap here on some of these principles around teaching about history and prejudice and racism. So I appreciate the work that we're doing on those areas, but I do see some questions about how we are really implementing some of this Holocaust piece. And I know that new social studies curriculum is coming. The adoption is 23-24, is that correct?
That's the plan, yes.
So we'll adopt it for 23-24, or it will be adopted in 23-24?
So right now, you want to share about the process where you all are at?
Yeah, so we're actually in the midst of a social science adoption, K-12. And so right now, there are teachers that are field testing the materials. Once the field test is done, they'll come back and examine kind of the data that they've collected to make some recommendations.
About which curriculum? And have we, as we're looking at that new curriculum adoption as part of that, have we looked at how it stacks up with this specific law?
Yes.
Places.
Sorry, I apologize.
No, that's okay. I talk a lot.
No. Yes, we've made this a very specific part of our process when we're doing, the bias inventory and making sure that's embedded into it. We've pulled each one of these elements from each of the bills to make sure that there are aspects of what's in the new curriculum that's going to be taught.
I guess just following up on your question, the Director, I mean, we actually have 2 teachers who are telling us that they are teaching this.
Right.
So I'm just curious where the assumption, is that other teachers are not. I'll be honest, I guess I want to come back to what we're considering is a very narrow question. It is a narrow question about is PPS meeting the law as it's written? that does not get at the question of whether we can be doing better, right? And I think one of the things that I saw in this complaint is acknowledgement that, like, absolutely, there's always room to review what we're doing. I think these questions about accountability are really important, right? I think there should be accountability at the school level, at the classroom level, at the teacher level. But that accountability is not just about this law, it's about everything we teach, right? And how do we make sure that what we're trying to do and what we're saying we're doing, is actually happening in the classroom? And I love that conversation. I think for our question tonight, though, is the district meeting state law? I don't see anything in the complaint that says we're not. So I'm curious from which, again, I want to separate that up from the question of whether we could be doing better, which I hear you saying that there's lots of things we can improve. And I hear district staff saying, yeah, we're in agreement on that. That's actually not the question that's before the board tonight. It's not about whether the curriculum is as good as it can be. It is simply, do we meet the law? And I guess I'd like to ask board members, going back, because I know there was a little bit of lawyerly interpretation, is there anything in here that leads any of the board members to think we're not actually meeting the letter of the law, which is providing the instructional material?
I'll answer that just in my reading and looking, like, relooked at the complaint, which is not, there's commentary on the lessons that are offered, but really the fundamental, the first line is a complaint that they're failing to provide Holocaust, genocide, and anti-racist education. So it's not like you're failing to provide the lessons, it's the taught, so to me, there is a difference. So not looking back at what we were being asked to affirm, and it's talking again about lessons, like, hey, we provided the curriculum. That doesn't mean, to me, there's still a gap between, are we actually providing that instruction?
And I would say, I think the way that it's phrased as lessons is too narrow. It's compliance with 329494, which is instruction. So I want the board to be looking at the right standard, and I'm sorry that that's not in the memo.
And are you saying that instruction could be a synonym for curriculum resources?
I
Or that
think content is part of instruction. It's not, I don't think it's defined here, and I haven't done a definition of instruction. I think your common understanding of instruction is what you should use to guide you in the statute.
So when I look at, to try and look up the word instruction, right, and it talks about teaching and in education. For example, the school offers personalized instruction and where it is. So I guess when I'm looking at that word in this basic form, that means we are teaching. But if we are not sure that it's getting taught, how can we say we're following the law when we're not sure if it's being taught?
I'm sorry, I didn't interrupt, but why, if the materials are being provided, why are we assuming that they're not being used in the classroom?
Well,
Because it just says in here that we need to improve our direct follow-up with every school to ensure they're utilizing the resources, which
and I'm not,
which
and
leads me to believe, like,
But an audit can find either that we're not, or an audit may find that we are in fact
I
successful.
just don't know.
I'm not saying we are or not. I'm just saying I don't know from this information if we are. I hear what you're saying and I get what you're saying, but there's nothing in here that's saying, oh, we are doing this. I know we're supposed to do it, and they're saying that we providing the materials to do it with, but we don't know if it's actually getting done. And that's the only thing I have a question. Go ahead.
What I think is interesting about this is that everything you guys described about the curriculum materials, the professional development, the framework to make sure that we're in compliance is, our ongoing work all the time about having fidelity to an instructional framework. And it's always a challenge in every classroom, in every school, to make sure that the resources are being used and we have some consistency of instruction. This situation is a little bit different because we have a state statute that is pretty prescriptive. And so it's different than just the processes that we have that are set up to gauge fidelity to the instructional framework. That's what kind of sticks in my craw here.
And I think both can be true, right? I believe that we are providing information, right? But when I look at the statute and look at when I interpret instruct means, I just don't see where that instruction portion is happening. I believe we have the material. I believe we're getting the materials to educators, but do we know if they're actually using them? Because if they're not using them, then we're not instructing at that point. So that's all I'm saying. I think both is true, I mean, as far as, you know, we have information, but I just, for me, it'd be like, yes, we had an audit, we know our teachers is doing it, then for me, it'd be easy to be like, oh, yep, we're following the law as I interpret it. I'm not an attorney, you know, one day I might go for my law license, but, you know, as I interpret it, you know, that I don't know if that is actually happening.
Director Lowry and then Ms. Bartley.
So I
Let you
think
respond.
for me, I feel like the district has done a lot of what the district high level can control on this question of providing the resources, creating the crosswalk, providing professional development, and then working to improve it. I think some of what we're talking about is the instruction that actually being delivered in the classroom goes back to our relationship with our teachers union and how do we talk about accountability? And how do we continue to say, this is what we're being asked to do under the law, this is what the district's provided, do we have buy-in from our teachers, where is that? And so that's part of the question for me of this. I will be voting yes to a poll tonight because I do think the district is on the path and doing the work, but I do think there is a great deal of room for improvement, and I'm anxious to see what that social studies curriculum will be as we continue to do better work about this. And I would just say my own daughter's education around these topics within PPS has been phenomenal, and she has received a great deal of this instruction, especially about the Holocaust, from her teachers. So I know it may not be systemic and universal, but I know from personal experience it is being well taught in PPS.
And it may be systemic and universal.
It may be.
I
I don't know.
It may be, right, that's the piece, it may be.
It may be.
Yeah.
All right, I did want to make sure that I am not used, and my colleague is not used to exemplify that there is a systemic approach, because we're both known for doing this work, and this is a person whose ancestors survived the Holocaust, and some did not. So please don't use us that way. Also,
Can I just interrupt for a second?
oh
though?
no,
But
I'd prefer not, because I did wait so long. Thank you.
I'll have a question about that.
Okay,
point.
great. This is, I surveyed my students before teaching them about the Holocaust, which I had to take a risk to do. Although I know that it's being proposed that this is included, I received this, and I'm trying to follow the directives, and I'm trying to use the book, as my students will nod their heads and say. But I was told to follow this by quarter, and it does not include that unit. I did not use this unit. I used my own supplementary materials, which frankly are superior, including bringing in a legacy speaker. But prior to that, these are the surveys. I surveyed my students, and 46% did not know what the Holocaust was, had never heard that word, and there's documentation here, okay? Likewise, the law also specifies that the district has to provide education against racism, other genocides, but specifically racism, prejudice, and stereotyping. Think about it. In our district, do you know that there actually is anti-racist curriculum that is being systemically implemented? We all know that that is not happening and that we can do better. And it's not a matter of blaming Dr. Armstrong or her department. She's fairly newer to the district and has done a wonderful job of putting this together. It's not a matter of blame, but if we're looking at the law, we do need to do better in terms of teaching about racism, and that includes racism, yes, against Jewish people, because anti-Semitic hate crimes have risen by great percentages, and they're all in the middle there. Anti-Semitic incidents in K-12 schools increased 106% in 2021. We also know that in Oregon, anti-Black racist incidents have dramatically increased and have been increasing in our schools. So the beauty of this law, with respect to the people who created the law, some of whom were survivors or descendants of survivors themselves, with respect to them, it is disrespectful to say that we're talking about a crosswalk to a tribal history bill as the way we're implementing this. It's disrespectful, and that is not okay. And it also is a beautiful law in the sense that these people who were Holocaust survivors or descendants of them went ahead and included in the letter of the law that they wanted other genocides to be taught about too, and they wanted racism, including anti-Black racism, to be included, and we need to do better. And Ms. Lowry, I truly ask for you to consider changing the vote, because what you're voting for, if you vote to affirm this, is against the law. The law is not being followed. Okay, I'd like to turn it over to Teresa
So
and the students.
Actually want to bring it back to board discussion, and I do have a question for you. I guess it just back to your first point about not upholding you and what you're doing. I'm just curious why you don't think your peers are as successful in using the materials being provided to
Well,
teach
there's
students.
been an exodus of teachers in the district. There's been a major exodus of teachers, and there are many new teachers, including huge numbers of subs, okay? I'm a 20-year veteran teacher, and it's simply not true that in a district where there's such an exodus, that there's a systemic approach. And we all know, in terms of an anti-racist curriculum, a curriculum against racism and prejudice, we don't have that, and we need it. Teresa?
Yes, I've worked for about 7 years in social studies classrooms, both on the on the elementary level during social studies units, and on the high school level for 6 years, supporting students in learning English in social studies classrooms. And I have talked to several of the social studies teachers that I work with who concur and agree that we don't have a systemic approach to teaching about genocides and the Holocaust and teaching anti-racism. They agree with me, and I've seen it with my own eyes because I go to many different classes. And this is not, I don't also want us to be used to apply additional pressure on teachers and saying the accountability rests with you, because what we're trying to say is the accountability rests with district
That's
management.
what the law says. The law says the district must provide, not the individual teacher must provide, and not the individual teacher must seek out random lessons, but the curriculum has to include this. And it's true that the letter of this law is quite ornate and well-written.
I think on that point, to me, it's clear that the district has provided the resources. It's not clear that they're being universally implemented. So if that's your point, that the district must provide, I think we have sufficient evidence of that. But I'm not convinced
Do you
that
see
it's
anti-racist?
being implemented.
So,
across.
any further discussion or questions from the board? And then I do want to move us towards.
What about the students? Could they say one more word? They made all these notes. Thank
I
you.
just want to say, I get Director Scott where you're coming from, but just because they're providing it, and just because I don't know all the factors with the law, and I know it just doesn't seem like it's enough, or meeting the law isn't enough because obviously students aren't learning about it, and I'm just learning about this in 8th grade, and it's just, yes, I guess it is meeting the law, but we don't know what I don't know what the law is, and it's it just seems like it's not enough because we're not learning about it. Or I guess, yes, some teachers are teaching it, but just because you're getting information from the teachers out there teaching it and not from the students who haven't learned about it, I guess.
Thank you. I do have a question. So I'm actually, because now when you say it's a district responsibility, where do the responsibility lie with our teachers if they're not teaching the curriculum? And especially when they have folks like you who they can come and get information. I'm not trying to put blame anywhere. I'm just saying that I think we all share blame for a system that is not adequately educating our kids about this,
I think that's a
anti-racist,
great question.
almost like genocide stuff. So where do we put the responsibility on this? Well, for me, I think we all share responsibility, and I don't think it's just one or the other. But how do we get our teachers who are not teaching it to get the teaching it? How do we, what does that look like?
I beg your understanding that the resources that the district is claiming they provide for teachers are woefully inadequate, and there is truly no systemic way that teachers even have curriculum associated with teaching against racism. There's no anti-racist curriculum or boundary setting being done with kids at all. And I don't think anyone has made the argument that that aspect of the law is being followed. So please understand, don't assume that there is the curriculum, and don't assume that there's been even any directives to teachers to teach this, because there haven't been. In fact, we were directed to teach something else and to exclude the Holocaust. So the law says the district. Now I want to address your question, which is about teacher responsibility.
When I hear district, I look at all of us.
I
don't look at
understand.
teachers versus the administration office. When I hear district, I hear all of us.
The district, I hear that.
Okay.
I hear that.
So that's how I look at it. So when
In
you say
terms
district, I'm hearing
if
everyone.
we were to get all the way to where you want to be, where the teachers are embracing this and teaching it, we would have to have professional development time for teachers, because there are people who are not educated in the history of the 1940s and the history of multiple genocides, and definitely not prepared to really teach about racism and multiple forms of racism. So I have confidence that we can get to that place. We can't get there through a crosswalk about tribal history when we're supposed to be provided with materials about the Holocaust. And we can't get there by pretending we're doing something that we're not doing. But yes, we would have to give teachers some professional development time and adequate training. And then, just like, you know, I've been known to break the rules from time to time, but guess what? In terms of this, I have taken it seriously and very respectfully used the book to the best of my ability. And you haven't heard me complaining about the curriculum. I'm only saying that, in fact, we have been directed not to teach that. We've been directed to teach 4 units, excluding the Holocaust unit. And that's just in 8th grade. And that's one of the things that they put down as how we're solving this problem. So it's just not where we need to be right now.
Ms. Armstrong.
And, yeah.
Yeah, no, I appreciate that, and I appreciate your passion, and I just want to point out that in my step 1 response, I linked in a document, and on page 2 of that document, about halfway down under 6.8, there's a resource document that was shared with all 6 through 8 school leaders and ELA and social studies teachers. And in that resource document, you're able to see, if you have that available, there's a social studies side, and on the right is English language arts. And in there, in bold, highlighted in yellow, it talks about one of the 2 lessons that needs to be taught to address items that are enacted in Senate Bill 13. So I'm not sure about the
13 is not the bill, excuse my interruption. That's the wrong law. We're not here for 13. That is a different law.
Okay.
So please, just respectfully to the people who have fought for the real law that we're talking about, and we're in touch with the SB 13 people. We very much also believe in following that law. But can you see how, when
Yes,
we're
so-
talking about the Holocaust,
Yes.
that's a different law?
So let's let.
I
Ms.
beg
Armstrong.
for some understanding and respect on that.
Sorry,
Yeah.
I misspoke.
Okay.
That's on tribal history, shared history, but there is a link in there that addresses what the resources and the expectation for teachers for genocide in the linked document in the step 1 response.
Claim
Is that
4.
The 6th, 7th, and 8th grade scope and sequence, is that what you're referencing? Sorry.
Oh, it's the last
Yeah, so the
6-3.
8th grade scope and sequence.
For what subject matter? You know?
Appeal claim 4, is that what the link is?
Yeah, there's several.
That's high school.
There's several links that, through the different levels, grade bands.
Any additional board comments or questions before we move to the vote? So I don't know how this vote is going to go tonight. I'm going to vote to uphold, and again, the reason why, what I said before, that the question before us is very narrow. It's not the broader question, which I think you're raising, about whether we can be doing better or more.
It's not the question
It's
I'm
very,
raising.
Ms. Bartley, I'm going to
You're
finish now.
misspeaking and
It's-
speaking over the complaint that I made. The complaint that I made is
Ms.
related
Bartley,
to the
I'm-
law.
Thank you for being here tonight. I'm going to vote to uphold it because the narrow question is
wait.
whether we are upholding the law, and everything I've seen in terms of the complaint response is that we are. I do think there's a conversation here about whether we can be doing more. I think there's a conversation about the accountability, and in terms of the resources that we are providing, are they being used effectively in the classroom? But again, this complaint process that you've chosen to use tonight is very narrowly tailored to that. I do want to ask our general counsel, who's engaged right now, for a moment. Hey, Liz.
You're misunderstanding the complaint that I made, and I do have
Liz,
rights
I'm
as a
sorry.
complainant. The
So,
complaint is whether
Ms.
we're
Bartley,
following the
you've
law,
had your
not
chance
whether
tonight,
it's
so we're gonna have our conversation and we're gonna have our vote. But again, you've had your
You're
chance.
not voting on what I
So,
complained about.
Liz, My question, what I was going to say is, and again, I don't know how the vote's going to turn out tonight. If we do end up holding the superintendent's complaint, there is an appeal process to ODE, is that correct? So again, to the extent, and again, I don't know what's going to happen, there is another appeals process for that you can engage in. We can talk about that after the vote. Any other comments from board members before we move to a vote?
Anything else about SB 13?
Do you consider it an accurate characterization of your complaint that we're failing to provide Holocaust, genocide, and anti-racist education?
I would like to stick with the letter of my complaint, and I was talking about the entire letter of the law, whether we are following the law. Mr. Scott, Director Scott, continues to say that I'm asking a broader question. That's a mischaracterization of me entirely and what I'm doing. I'm talking about the law. I do believe we as PBS can do it, but we're not there yet. And it is a lie. It's open lying to the public to say that we're currently doing that. It would be a lie to say that we're currently
And the
doing
superintendent and staff have indicated that we are in compliance with the law. I am going to side with them, and then again, there's an appeals process for ODE to weigh in on this. Any other comments from board members before we vote?
What is it specifically we're voting on?
We're voting to uphold the superintendent's findings in the appeal process.
The finding that we're providing lessons, or the providing that we're, or the finding?
The most-
Yeah, it does meet the
In-
requirements of the law.
In compliance with the law.
I did not complain about lessons.
Ms.
I
Bartley,
complained about
I'm
the
sorry,
law.
there's not a time for you to speak any longer in this hearing. We're going to move towards our vote, but thank you very much for your testimony.
Thank you.
I want to say one thing before we vote, which is, this is incredibly helpful that we're having this conversation at this time while we're in the process of field testing a new curriculum, because, you know, I hope that this has given a heightened focus on, you know, how that curriculum is integrating lessons around specifically anti-racist genocide and history and tribal history. And that we have more of a focus on how we're going to be, what we're going to be looking for in terms of direct instruction on those things than we would have if we hadn't had this conversation.
Absolutely.
And I do think that there's something really interesting about the fact that we're not used to looking at our curriculum relative to specific statutory requirements. We're used to looking at it in terms of, does it have fidelity to what we've adopted in the instructional standards and the grade level standards? So I think that we need to develop a better way of making sure that we're checking on those elements that are required by statute, because that's not very common for us. So
Yes, I just want to add just quickly that in the outline of our resources that we provide to building principals and teachers, we do list out the statute and the Senate bill, just as a reference point, so.
So I had a question, General Counsel Large, that you had earlier said the actual decision we're reversing on is to affirm or reverse the step one findings on page 4 of the board packet that provide that Portland Public Schools does meet the requirements of the law stated by providing lessons that provide education.
That's
And
not my
we
complaint.
were,
I agree.
and so I had heard you
It's
say earlier,
instruction.
Councilwoman
It's,
Hoffman,
it's instruction. That's
that
the-
it should say to meet the requirements of the law stated by providing instruction instead of lessons that provide education. Can we just strike that by providing instruction about the Holocaust, genocide, and anti-racist education?
Yes, it's really compliance with ORS 329,
It's the
494.
compliance with the law.
Okay, so are we gonna, okay.
Yep, I got that language.
Yeah,
Okay,
great.
the board is
Thank you.
now going to vote on the appeal of the superintendent's
Just wanna make
step one
clear what
decision
I'm
for the complaint 2022.06. All of those in favor of affirming the superintendent's step one decision that Portland Public Schools does meet the requirements of the law stated by providing instruction about the Holocaust, genocide, and anti-racist education, please indicate by saying yes.
Yes.
Yes. All opposed, please indicate by saying no.
No.
No,
At this point, we have, and council, help me out, a vote of 3-2, since we do not,
Yeah.
I'm sorry, 2-3, right? 2 in favor of holding, 3 opposed. And since we don't have 4 votes, I believe we need to hold this in abeyance. Tell me what holding in abeyance means.
We will need to schedule a part 2 where we have enough votes to have a decision. Right now, there hasn't been a decision because there isn't a majority of the board that has expressed in favor.
So we need to hold another meeting.
Right. I think it can be, right, it can be short. It's not a redo It's just a supplemental session where we have.
Do we
Great,
have the
so
right
we
to
are
attend?
held-
Doesn't the motion
we-
fail? If,
Yeah,
because
the
it
motion
didn't
should
get-
fail.
But it doesn't result in denial. It can fail, but the functional effect of that is there's been no decision on the appeal.
Can we record that the motion
There
failed?
is, so Ms. Bartley, we're going to finish up this meeting. So the motion at this point, this matter is held in abeyance. I'm fine saying if the motion technically failed.
Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah.
it doesn't bother me at all. And we will hold the matter in abeyance for another meeting. And with that, we are adjourned. We have a board meeting starting
1 minute.
in 1 minute.